I have a particular pleasure and privilege today in introducing Professor Sarah Jane Leslie, who is our keynote speaker. Sarah Jane is the class of 1943 Professor of Philosophy, Vice Dean for Faculty Development, Director of the Program in Linguistics, and Founding Director of the Program in Cognitive Science at Princeton University. Much of her academic work focuses on how we categorize and generalize information about the world around us. As part of this project, she examines how the language young children hear shapes their perception of social groups, and how this relates to stereotyping and prejudice. Most recently, she's been examining gender gaps in educational and career choices, and her work on the topic was named as one of 2015's most interesting scientific findings. Sarah Jane is the recipient of multiple grants, including from the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health. In 2015, she delivered the Gareth Evans Memorial Lecture at Oxford University and won the Stanton Prize from the Society for Philosophy and Psychology. Her work has been covered extensively in the media, including by the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. She's appeared on many television channels and radio channels, and it is a tremendous pleasure, as I say, to welcome her here today. Before I ask her to take the stage, could I just say that after Sarah Jane has spoken, we will have time for some Q&A. So as she's speaking, you can think of the Q's, and Jane will supply the A's. Sarah Jane.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that very generous introduction, and thank you all so much for having me here today. Before I begin, since I'm going to be talking about women in science, I wanted to express my sincere gratitude to an incredible woman in science, Uta Frith, who is sitting here in the front row. I had the honor and the privilege of knowing Uta since I was about that high, since I was a young girl, and so having Uta as a role model, as an example of how women can excel in academia, in science, how they can be the equal of anyone, was something that shaped my life from very formative years. So it was just unbelievable when Uta asked me to speak here today, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. Thank you, Uta. Thank you. So the question of why there are still so few women in science is one that gets asked in all sorts of contexts. Here's an example from a recent piece in the New York Times Magazine. But we'll notice that the way this question is posed here, and very often is posed in this way, why are there so few women in science? We often speak as though science or STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, were almost a monolithic whole in which women were underrepresented. And in contrast, other academic disciplines, such as the humanities and often the social sciences, are similarly treated as though they're a monolithic whole in which women are perfectly well represented. Actually, if we look at the data, it's much more complicated than this. So this is a graph of women's PhD receipt in the United States in recent years across 30 disciplines. The horizontal bar reflects where women would be represented if they were at the 50%, if they were represented at demographic levels. The lighter orange bars represent humanities and social science disciplines, and those darker bars, the red bars, represent natural science, technology, engineering, and math disciplines. So as we can see, in two STEM disciplines, molecular biology and neuroscience, women are actually represented basically essentially at 50%. Women are represented at demographic levels in the United States at the PhD level. And over here we have two humanities disciplines, music composition and my own home field of philosophy, which despite being humanities disciplines, actually have very few women in them. They're actually sandwiched right between mathematics and engineering, with only computer science and physics having a lower percentage than, of women. So this was a question that has always been very salient to me since, even though, again, my home discipline is a humanities discipline, philosophy, I was very often the only person like me in the room, the experience shared by women and minorities across the board in science disciplines. So instead of posing the question of why women are underrepresented in STEM as though it were this monolithic whole, my collaborators and I wanted to ask if we could explain this complex distribution of gender gaps across the whole spectrum of academic disciplines. So this is going to be the question I'm going to take up today. Before I move to that, we're just going to take a step back and ask a different question. So suppose we ask the question, what it takes to be good at a particular activity, say an intellectual activity. Well, the work by Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck and her colleagues suggests that people's responses to this can be found along a spectrum. If we ask people, say, what does it take to succeed in math? What does it take to succeed in science? We can find people's answers falling along a spectrum, which we can characterize by its endpoints. At one extreme, we might think it takes innate and unchangeable talent. That say, you're either a math person or you're not a math person. It's either something that you have or something that you don't have. And if you're not blessed with that innate ability, too bad for you. We might call this a fixed conception, since it reflects the idea that there's some fixed quantity in us that determines our ability to succeed. At the other end of the spectrum, we might think that instead what it takes to succeed is something more fluid, more malleable, more responsive to hard work and training. We might call this an incremental or growth conception, since it acknowledges that wherever you are, you can improve. People who hold a fixed conception of abilities might say and think things like, one has a fixed amount of inborn intelligence. One's ability to succeed at intellectual tasks is determined by this innate endowment. And to foreshadow where I'm going to go with this, in my home discipline, actually my home department, the Princeton philosophy department, in the 1980s, people would sometimes speak of the beam. The idea here was that some lucky individuals were born, as it were, with a beam of light coming from their foreheads. If you were lucky enough to be born with the beam, you could shine that beam on any subject matter you chose. You would thereby be able to illuminate it just simply with the sheer strength of your intellectual beam. No prior study required, just if you're one of those lucky individuals, what else do you need? Those who were not fortunate enough to be born with the beam were condemned to forever trail in the wake of those who were lucky enough to have it. Having the beam was the gold standard for being a successful philosopher, very much a fixed conception. In contrast, someone who holds an incremental conception might say and think things like intelligence is malleable. One can increase one's intelligence in a number of ways through learning and hard work. One's ability to succeed at intellectual tasks is never fixed. One can increase this ability over time. Now, in general, holding a fixed rather than an incremental conception of ability tends to lead to worse performance. And this is so particularly in the face of challenges. So for those of us who are educators in this room, or parents, or in any kind of position to nurture and have authority over young people, I would strongly recommend reading the work of Carol Dweck. What we find is that from a very young age, but continuing through adulthood, when people experience setbacks, if they hold an incremental conception, they're more likely to react to that setback by thinking, okay, I need to come back, I need to do better next time. If they hold a fixed conception, suppose they think that success in math requires one to be a math person, then failure in math may be encountered as evidence that you're not in fact a math person, and so why bother? Why keep on trying? Very, very interesting body of work. So these fixed mindsets are really bad for everyone. That's something that Carol Dweck's work shows. But what we wondered was whether some groups might be more impacted by a fixed mindset than others, particularly an ambient fixed mindset. In particular, our hypothesis was that disciplines that emphasize the need for innate brilliance, disciplines that have a beam-theoretic conception of what it takes to succeed, would be disciplines that have fewer women in them. And we thought this because there's a pervasive cultural association that links men, much more so than women, with raw innate ability. Now, I have laboratory data that I could use to illustrate this, but isn't it just so much more fun to use pop cultural examples? So I hope you'll forgive me. Hopefully the people in this room will remember the X-Files, the 90s show that featured 2 alien-hunting FBI agents. Unfortunately, when I give this talk to undergraduates, I have to apologize for this because they now were not actually born when the X-Files aired. Terribly depressing. Anyway, the X-Files featured 2 agents, a male agent, Agent Mulder, and a female agent, Agent Scully. Now, particularly in the 90s, Agent Scully, the female agent, was a very progressive figure and a strong role model. In addition to hunting aliens as an FBI agent, she was also a doctor and a scientist, someone who was very accomplished, someone who was portrayed in a very positive way. But if we really dig into the way that her abilities were portrayed on the show, we find that Agent Scully is shown as spending long hours in the lab, poring over test tubes, microscopes, and the like. She's always working very hard, incrementally making contributions. But what Agent Scully can never really match are the case-solving flashes of insight that her male partner is able to produce. Mulder has this kind of feral genius that Scully can never actually quite match. He takes these leaps of intuition that always lead to the key element that solves the case. Agent Scully always trails just a couple of steps behind him in this way, despite her putting in those hours, that careful, diligent study that he does not. Similarly, if we consider other examples in popular culture, it's very hard to find an example of even a single woman, maybe we can think of 1 or 2, but very few, single woman who's portrayed like Sherlock Holmes, like Dr. House from the show House MD, or that's Will Hunting from the 90s movie Good Will Hunting, where Will Hunting, the main character, is employed as a janitor at MIT, has no particular training or background in mathematics, but is nonetheless able, it turns out, to solve mathematical problems that the trained MIT mathematics faculty are unable to solve. He has the beam, so he's able to just kind of show up and figure out what's going on. Very hard to find a woman who is portrayed as having that kind of raw, untamable brilliance. When we do see women positively portrayed, they tend, like Dana Scully or Hermione Granger from Harry Potter, to have that ability grounded in long hours of study, hard work, and dedication. Hermione is portrayed as spending long hours, in her case, poring over spell books in the library, and that's very much the ground of Hermione's abilities. As some more cute evidence for this, a recent New York Times piece looked at the Google searches that people put in concerning their kids. So it turns out that people Google things like, is my son a genius? Because apparently Google would somehow know the answer to this. And what they were able to do was look at the proportion of searches as a function of the child's gender. So they found that for every 10 searches asking, is my daughter gifted, there were 25 searches asking, is my son gifted? This was not because people simply Googled their sons more than their daughters. For example, anything appearance related, such as, is my son overweight? There are almost twice as many inquiries asking, is my daughter overweight? And as I say, there are laboratory analogs of these kinds of findings. So against the backdrop of this, my collaborators and I framed what we called the field-specific ability beliefs hypothesis, which was that greater gender gaps will be found in academic disciplines that place more emphasis on raw talent. Since women are culturally stereotyped as being less likely than men to have the beam, as it were, to have that kind of raw, untamed talent, we predicted that academic disciplines that saw that as the gold standard for success would be academic disciplines in which women would be underrepresented. So to test this, we conducted a nationwide, nation being US, study of academics in 30 disciplines. We had about 2,000 participants, and we simply asked people questions about their own academic disciplines. For example, as a philosopher, I might have been asked to agree on or disagree on a spectrum with the statement, to be a successful philosopher requires a special aptitude that just can't be taught. We had a battery of 8 such questions, which we used to determine the extent to which practitioners of a field perceive there to be a need for raw ability. And we found over on that far end of the spectrum, many academic disciplines that instead thought that really hard work, dedication, and passion were the most important ingredients for success. These included disciplines such as education, psychology, and sociology, but also included science disciplines such as neuroscience, molecular biology, and earth science. At the other end of the spectrum, we found that other disciplines answered by saying that no, really in order to succeed, you had to have an unteachable aptitude. You had to have a special raw ability in order to succeed. And importantly, what we found was that these beliefs correlated quite nicely with women's PhD receipt in those fields. Disciplines which emphasized the need for raw brilliance tended, all else being equal, to have fewer women gaining PhDs in those fields. And if you're wondering what this little outlier is here, since you probably can't read it, that is none other than my home discipline, philosophy, all out there by its beamy lonesomeness. Philosophers, more so than mathematicians, more so than physicists, computer scientists, anyone else, really thought that you had to be brilliant in order to succeed. But now, we then broke down our disciplines into STEM subjects at the top, and where the S really stands for natural science here, and social science and humanities disciplines in the bottom graph. And what we found was that we weren't just picking up on some kind of STEM versus non-STEM divide, but actually within both of these broad domains, the extent to which brilliance was emphasized was a very good predictor of whether women would be represented in that discipline. So just isolating these two broad domains of disciplines, we still found the same correlations. We then wondered, what about racial diversity? Women are not the only social group that is stereotyped as lacking in raw brilliance. Racial and ethnic minorities, such as African Americans, are often similarly stereotyped. Particularly in the United States, there are a number of negative stereotypes about African Americans' intellectual abilities. And indeed, if we consider the pop cultural examples I gave early on, not only were they all male, they were also all white. And what we would predict is that any group that is stereotyped as being less likely to have that kind of raw ability, less culturally associated with it, will be less well represented in disciplines that say it's required for success. So we wondered whether these beliefs would affect racial diversity as well as gender representation, and we found that indeed they do. Right up there in that corner, education is a big outlier. That's actually where African Americans would be represented if they were represented in any discipline at their demographic rates. So we see a significant underrepresentation with the exception of education across the whole spectrum. But nonetheless, within that, we found that African American representation correlated again with beliefs about brilliance. This particular data set did not let us break down into the intersection of race and gender, but this is something that we're pursuing in future work. And indeed, as one would predict, what we're finding in ongoing data is that African American women are especially hard hit by these beliefs. So one question that people often want to ask at this juncture is whether it's just more difficult to succeed in some disciplines rather than others. So to address this, we controlled for a number of factors. We controlled for how selective the discipline is. So we measured what proportion of applicants to graduate programs in these disciplines gained admission. we measured the GRE scores of graduate applicants. This is, in case anyone's unfamiliar with it, this is a test, a standardized test that is used in the United States. It's often required for admission to graduate programs. And so we looked at the scores of the graduate applicants, both overall, and we also looked at quantitative math scores alone and entered those into our regression. We looked at how math-intensive the discipline is, since it's often stated that women are underrepresented in disciplines that require high levels of math ability. So what we asked the question, as it were, statistically, whether these factors predicted women's representation in a way that would eliminate the impact of beliefs about brilliance, or whether, even when we statistically control for these factors, we would still see whether women and African Americans are less well represented in disciplines that believe in brilliance. And indeed, that's what we found. These factors don't account for the patterns that we see here. Academics' beliefs about what is required for success are predictive of women's and African Americans' representation, even when controlling for these factors. Now, everything I've shown you so far has been correlational evidence. We wondered whether or not it would be possible in a controlled laboratory setting to find direct evidence for our hypothesis. So we invited adults into our lab, and we divided them into two groups. Both groups were told that their university was considering introducing a new major. And we had various versions of this, including specifying the major as being in STEM or not in STEM, various versions of this. So they were told about this new major, this new field of study that students could choose to have as their primary field of study. And the students were told that the faculty associated with this new major are looking for students who are, and now we divided our participants into two groups. They were either told that the adjectives that the faculty used in describing the students they were looking for was dedicated, hardworking, motivated, passionate. That was one group. Or brilliant, intelligent, talented, smart. Everything else was the same between the two groups, just these adjectives that were cited as being what the faculty had said they were looking for in students. We then measured participants' attitudes towards the new major, whether they thought it was something they wanted to pursue, whether it was something that they thought they would have a sense of belonging in, various batteries of questions. And we found no difference over here between men and women in their attitudes when the hard-working adjectives were used, but when the adjectives used were brilliant, intelligent, talented, smart, we found men were significantly more positive in their attitudes towards the major than women were. So in this controlled laboratory setting, again, everything the same except for these adjectives, we see a difference in men's and women's attitudes. But now, those are adults. So those are 18 plus. We wondered whether these are the sorts of differential attitudes that take about 18 years of learning in order to see show up, or whether we might be able to see an early gender gap. And we focused on 6- and 7-year-old children. So this is a point in time where girls are performing at least as well as boys academically. Girls are not having any experience of being less academically able than the boys in their class. Their grades are just as good. And by the way, both boys and girls know at that age that the girls are the ones getting the better grades. So in a way, there should be absolutely no reason to expect that girls at this age would show this kind of effect, except that 6 years of cultural learning is a long time for a child. 6 years is plenty of time for kids to soak up cultural stereotypes from the environment around them. And these cues come from all sorts of different sources. It's not univocal, it's not straightforward, but kids are very sensitive to this. So we wondered whether we would see in these small children this sort of effect. So to test that, we had kids come into the lab, we tested them individually, and we told them about a novel game that we sometimes ask kids if they want to play. 2 groups, everything the same, except one group was told, but here's what you have to know. This game is not for everyone. It's only for kids who try really, really hard. Only hard-working kids can be good at this game. The other group, everything the same, but they were told this game is only for kids who are really, really smart. Only smart kids can be good at this game. We then asked them if they wanted to play this game. If they got to choose to do something tomorrow, would it be this game? If they were playing this game, did they think they would feel happy or sad? So on and so forth. Again, 6 and 7 years of age, we found no difference in boys and girls when the game was described as only being for hardworking kids. But at this young age, we found already boys having a significantly more positive attitude towards the smart game, girls having a more negative attitude towards it. So where do we go from here? Well, ideally, we would, I think, eliminate these harmful stereotypes. But the age at which they are absorbed makes this a very difficult and long-term societal project. I can't stand here and say, here is the silver bullet. If we just do this one thing, it will all be solved. But I think one thing that we, those of us who are gathered in this room, can do is encourage young people to make choices that will shatter these stereotypes. I think that there are small things and big things that we can do to help support and encourage young people in doing this. By diversifying these fields that are traditionally associated with both genius and also with exclusively white men, if we diversify those fields in the long run, we show by a plethora of positive examples that these fields are not the exclusive domain of one social group. So when we're talking to young people, either as educators, as parents, as caregivers, any kind of authority figure addressing a young person, let's just first of all avoid words like brilliant, genius, and gifted. And importantly, I would say, let's not even say how brilliant Elizabeth Anscombe, the philosopher, or Marie Curie were. We might think that we're giving young girls, young women, positive role models, but actually what we're also communicating is that these fields are ones in which brilliance matters. And that can cause a reaction of saying, well, that's fine for Marie Curie, that's fine for Elizabeth Anscombe, but that's not me. I'm still under the shadow, this is all going on implicitly, of course, I'm still under the shadow of this stereotype, even if those women are not. It communicates that these fields are for brilliant people. We should, of course, stay away from anecdotes designed to illustrate how naturally gifted someone is. I studied math in college, and I just remember periodically the professor would break into an anecdote about how brilliant someone was, and that's not helpful. That communicates that that's what's required to succeed. And very often these anecdotes are actually historically inaccurate. Very often they downplay the amount of energy and hard work and hours that people put into achieving a particular result, and instead twist the narrative to suggest that it was in fact effortless. We should offer praise for achievement, not inherent talent. It's not to say that we can't praise people. When people accomplish things, we should praise them. But make the praise about what they did, not who they are. We might say things like, you worked so hard on this project and you did a terrific job on it. It's a real accomplishment. You should be really proud of your achievement. Not, oh, you have a real talent for this. Again, that suggests it's something stable and inherent in the person. We shouldn't comfort young people by saying things like, it's okay, not everyone is a math person. You have so many other talents. It's all right that math isn't one of them. This is something we sort of instinctively want to do. It's a way we think it's comforting. We think that it's going to make the person feel better. But it reinforces the idea that only that there is such a thing as a math person. We can have open conversations about these different ways of thinking about abilities. It doesn't just have to be in the linguistic choices at that more subtle level. We can be explicit in this. If we're educators, we can talk to our class about these beliefs and about these stereotypes. If we are parents, we can talk to our children. Any role that we might be in where we have that influence, we can take that opportunity to talk to young people about this. Just shine light on it. We can challenge people who emphasize raw brilliance. Probably many of us have the experience on an extremely regular basis of hearing people say things, however explicitly or however implicitly, that presuppose that success in our particular disciplines requires raw brilliance. We can challenge people on that. But I think this is probably the most important one. When you speak from a position of power, don't hesitate to say what it took for you to get there. Be open, be vulnerable in talking to young people about what it took for you to get there. And remind those young people that one day they will speak from positions of power. Remind those college students that even though they might right now feel powerless and young, they are role models to those 6-year-olds. What they do matters, their choices matter, and when they've made those choices, or when they're making those choices, they can talk about what went into that. So I'm gonna follow my own advice. I'm gonna stand here today and say that I am not addressing all of you today because I am brilliant. I am not a genius. It wasn't effortless. It was incredibly difficult. I put in blood, sweat, and tears. I have failed many times. I've been rejected from all sorts of things. I failed. I've encountered obstacles. It wasn't easy. It wasn't effortless. I'm standing here today for one reason and one reason only, which is that I picked myself up and I kept on going, and I didn't let it stop me. So, thank you all.
Sit along here. You sit in the middle. Yeah, you take the main seat. So, Sarah Jane, that was a terrific address. I mean, I haven't encountered the beam before, but I'm sure others may have. But anyway, look, lots to talk about. We've got till past to take some questions. So, and there are roving microphones. So, anybody got a question? Right at the back, right at the very back. Bernard, I think it is.
I just want to echo what a really interesting talk that is, and not just superficially. Sorry, is it working? But actually the way it helps us all to think about ourselves. And so the question is, I mean, there's many questions I'd like to ask, but this one. Do you think that getting people who are successful to think about themselves in the way that you're talking would actually help us with the other issue that Venki talked about, with the bullying, harassment, and so on issue? Because actually, I have the feeling that someone who believes they got to where they did through hard work, through overcoming... I mean, the truth is that it's like sort of unfashionable. People pretend that they don't do any work. I can remember this. When I was a student, you know, you used to sort of party, but then you'd work all night. So people worked really hard and they pretended not to. Do you think that people who actually even reassess their self-image as someone who got there through hard work, to overcoming obstacles and so on, is perhaps less likely to go in for bullying and harassment than someone who believes they're just entitled because they've just got it? It's a rather loaded question because I've given the answer, but I do reflect that. And the other thing is, when you say to people, say how you got there through hard work, etc., what you're actually saying is think about yourself a bit more when you're speaking. So thank you very much. I don't think much answer is called for, but fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I do agree with what you said. I think that particularly when we have a system that thinks of some people at the top as being absolutely irreplaceable because they're special, because they have an inherent talent. They're not people who got there, again, due to hard work, due to devotion, the sorts of things that other people can do, but rather thinks that they're special, that they have, as it were, the beam, which is just, such a perfect metaphor, I think, for thinking about the idea that some individuals are just special in this way. I think when you have a system that views certain individuals like that and they view themselves like that, I think absolutely that's a place, that's a system in which people may feel more comfortable to bully or harass people who are seen as, who are seen as replaceable. If they're irreplaceable, why can't they take liberties with those ones down on the totem pole who are replaceable? I don't think that this will solve the problem of bullying and harassment. I don't think that it's the only factor that goes in to these sorts of situations, but I think you're absolutely right in pointing out that there is a connection between these ways of thinking and behaving.
So I've got a number of people indicating to me. Emma, I'll take that question, and then Venki, our president, has a question, and then somebody else on this table.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think I could. I'm so fascinated that you're concentrating on language, because I was a language advisor in education, and education is my thing. And I worked and observed in the nursery back in the 80s. I'm an alien. We call it kindergarten, which is about education.
So do I.
Very interesting cultural differences. But nursery is, to me, so symptomatic of the infantilizing of women who are normally called girls. And what I first saw in the nursery, and I hope to heavens it's not there anymore, was a Wendy house. Mm-hmm. Whereas we went on and we created graphic areas, which could be a garage or a cafe or whatever. Women are usually referred to as girls. People look quite shocked, and they think that lady is a term of respect. But there is so much in which women are made invisible in terms of the media reporting. I'll just give 2 examples. It said that parents who evade child support are going to have some sanction against them. And I would have thought that they're predominantly women rather than parents is so general. And it's sort of, the women become invisible. The other one, my friend told me the other day, is that going to make a sex doll, and people are queuing up to buy it. And she said, not me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think we see in the media all over the place ways in which men and women are portrayed differently. And these are cues that our kids are picking up on. There's a reason why 6-year-old girls already have these beliefs, already have these stereotypes. And I think that a significant piece of the puzzle, is the media in the sorts of ways you're pointing out. Thank you.
The nursery, what happens in the nursery?
Yes. Exactly. It starts incredibly young.
We'll take a question from Venki.
I think one issue is that major scientific discoveries are seen as occurring in a vacuum. And when you look at scientific discoveries, even the greatest advances, like the discovery of calculus, was done by 2 people simultaneously within each other's lifetime. You look at the theory of evolution. You know, you have Darwin and Wallace coming up with natural selection at the same time. Quantum mechanics, you have 2 completely different formulations by Heisenberg and Schrödinger. And so another way to think about it is that the state of knowledge has reached a certain stage where the next jump becomes sort of apparent to a few people. It's not that somebody is such a genius that they've thought of it in a vacuum. And maybe if that idea was conveyed, how science sort of progresses as a culture, reaches a certain stage, and then certain advances become possible. That's another.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I think that that's the kind of conversation we need to have, the kind of message that we need to send. And, you know, I think that the Royal Society is the kind of body that's incredibly well placed to tell those real stories, to tell actually how scientific progress happens, to undercut exactly the kind of perception you're talking about, that these things happen in a vacuum because one lone, brilliant person had a flash of insight. Thank you.
So we've got one person at the same table as Venki. We've got one on the front table and one at this other one. So perhaps afterwards there and then there.
Yeah, just one question. Have you considered expanding the study to other countries and other cultures? One, because, of course, the association between women and brilliance may be different. I'm thinking about Finland, for example. But also the association of brilliance with success in particular subjects. And here, particularly thinking about Asian differences.
Yeah, we would love to do that. It's not something that we've had the opportunity to do yet, but it's on our list of studies we would very much like to do. Anecdotally, I've been told, I can't verify this, but anecdotally I've been told that in the Middle East and India, computer science and engineering are both comparatively more diverse for gender and also are perceived to be disciplines in which hard work suffices. So that, if indeed accurate, then that's an interesting prediction that we would make in a culture in which the same subject matter could be perceived differently, and that would have concrete implications for its gender balance. And I also agree that stereotypes about women and intelligence may differ cross-culturally, and we would therefore predict differences in representation.
So I think we have a gentleman here, and then the lady in the red top. Oh, sorry, you were first. Sorry.
It's okay, I don't mind.
You go first.
My question is from the point of view of an educator who's fascinated by and somewhat disappointed by simultaneously the state of our school curriculum for a number of reasons. And just reflecting what Venki said about career flexibility, I wonder if you've got any comments on the requirement for our young people, and I'm thinking of my daughter's pain at the moment. She's aged 15. She has to choose 3 subjects. This suggests that it's going to be very difficult for her to come out with interdisciplinarity as a feature of her post-16 learning, and she is erring towards what might be deemed to be humanities subjects in this very narrow choice. Do you have any comment on that or advice for our policymakers?
It's fascinating to me because the US system is actually very different in that respect. What I understood you to be saying is that your daughter, who's in high school, secondary school, is being forced to choose particular subjects. So in the US, we actually don't ask young people to choose until towards the end of their second year of university. So it's actually a good, I would say, probably 4 years later. And I like that system, I think, for the reasons that you're pointing out. I think that the earlier that we ask kids, young people, to pigeonhole themselves, to make these choices, we're asking them to do that without them having had a full range of exposure to the options that are out there. In general, when people make decisions with less good information, they're actually more likely to rely on things like stereotypes, like rapid sorts of choices. So a very interesting question could be that maybe asking young people to make choices like that earlier on could lead to a greater impact of stereotypes. That's speculation, but it's an interesting question. I am a proponent of allowing students to take longer to choose, allowing students to expose themselves to a full range of possibilities before making a decision. I myself would absolutely not be in philosophy, nor would I have studied, I studied math and philosophy in college. I would have studied neither of those had I been asked to pick at age 16.
This gentleman, thank you.
I wonder if you can shed some light on this. Entertainment industry and storytelling have a strong role creating model business. In traditional storytelling, you have the hero's journey, and the hero is not gifted. Somebody or something happens, i.e. go to education, and you get the knowledge that allows you to surmount the obstacles that you have. Why don't we push collectively on the entertainment industry? Because kids learn a lot more from YouTube how to play a game than calculus from 3 Brown 1 Eye.
Well, I think we should push on the entertainment industry. I think that the sorts of narratives that they put out there for children are exactly what shapes children's perceptions. I think that's why I don't want to put all the blame on the media at all, but I think that that's a significant piece of the puzzle in answering the question of why we see children acquiring these stereotypes. I think that it's an interesting question, the sort of narrative that you pointed to, narratives in which a hero has to acquire the knowledge needed in order to fulfill the task. So I think some stories have that structure, but I think there are also some stories that might superficially look to have that kind of narrative, but are actually more about a hero discovering that he is in fact the chosen one, that he is actually the one who really deep down has what it takes. And I'm using the gendered pronoun there on purpose because it's almost invariably in those sorts of narratives a male protagonist. And in these sorts of, in fairy tales or in so many more modern tales that we tell our children, it's so often the male who is the actor and the female who is acted upon. The male is the protagonist, the woman needs to be rescued, needs to be helped, exhibits so much less agency. And I think that that's exactly the kind of message. It may be subtle, it may be merely statistical, but little kids are incredibly good statistical processors. They pick up on these small differences in portrayal.
Now, we're drawing close to the time, so this lady in the red, I'm going to get in trouble with my colleagues because I'm going to take 2 more questions beyond that. So I'll take the chap in the blue shirt and Saiful at the front. And I just want to say, before you ask your questions, Sarah Jane has very kindly told us that she's going to be around all day, so she's willing to answer questions. So I'm really sorry if I haven't got to your question, but please grab her wherever she is, and she's, as you can see, brilliant at answering them and very willing to do so. So we'll just take 3 more
very
questions.
Hard working at answering.
Brilliant.
Hello, my name is Lopa Patel from Diversity UK. My question is in 2 parts. Firstly, thank you for a fascinating presentation. I wanted to pick up on this question of raw talent. Did you disprove raw talent as the measure of success? That was the first part of my question. And the other part of the question is related to the pop culture that you mentioned. We're in an era of celebrity pop culture with talent shows. I mean, the word talent appears in the title of the show, which seems to highlight those that are talented over those that could perhaps succeed from hard work. So I just wondered if you had perspectives on those 2 issues.
So my research more looks at beliefs about raw talent rather than raw talent itself. So I couldn't say that I have disproved the notion of raw talent in what I've presented. But I think and there is scientific work that is done on that, and what I think overwhelmingly the message is that whether or not there is an innate component to what people are able to achieve in their lives, it's a relatively small piece of the picture. How people choose to spend their time, the skills that they develop, the energy, the effort that they put in is incredibly important. But I would also add that we are very bad, it's a very vexed scientific question how to unravel the components of hard work, dedication, accumulated hours, the social support that is required for that, which is immense and not given equally to people. It's a complex scientific question how to untangle that from any kind of, say, genetic contribution. And given that that's a complex scientific question, I think we should check ourselves when we think that we can discern in another person raw talent. If we think that, say, on the basis of a brief conversation with someone or even a more extended conversation with someone, if we think we can detect what parts of their accomplishments, their abilities in that context are due to something genetic as opposed to something more environmentally determined, well, that would mean that we're much, much better at doing this than the scientists who actually study it. So I think we should be very skeptical about those reactions. I think that they have a lot to do with human psychology, with the way that we perceive and attribute various things, much less to do with actually the reality of the situation. And I think I would, say similar things about the current, range of TV shows that talk about talent and the like. I think that there's something very sexy to us about the idea that some people are special in particular ways. And there's something comparatively more boring about the idea that, from a really young age, this person devoted a lot of time to something and their families and their friends were supportive of it. So they incrementally got much better at it and now they're really good at it. It's kind of boring. It's much more fun to tell the Goodwill Hunting narrative where it just, happens out of the blue. But again, I think that that's more about psychology, our psychology, than it is about any kind of biological reality.
So,
good morning, Tom Welton from Imperial College, but really asking this question more in my role, I think, as a trustee of the Royal Society of Chemistry. So many of us work with and for organisations that give prizes and awards. And generally, these are perceived to be prizes for brilliance, and then labels of brilliance once they've been awarded. It would seem to me that, given what you've been saying, that's somewhat problematic, to say the least, and maybe we should be asking questions about what we give those awards for, and whether even prizes and awards are the best ways of recognising people in our communities. What advice do you have for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think that giving prizes to brilliant people because they're brilliant obviously props up exactly the sort of system I'm talking about. And I think when you see prizes that are supposed to go to people for being brilliant, I think that you see much less diversity in the recipients of those prizes. I'm not against giving prizes or recognizing achievement more generally. I think it should be for what the person actually accomplished, not for whether they have some special innate quality such as being brilliant. And I think it sounds like you're in a position to be a real leader here, to make a change that could have a concrete impact on what young people, what children are going to grow up feeling that they're able to do. So I would strongly encourage that.
Very good. Now, our last question.
Again, thank you for a really fascinating presentation. I'll keep it short because I know we're between here and the coffee break. You mentioned words at the end, and I agree with you how words and language are important. And it refers back to a previous diversity conference. In adverts for jobs at any level, especially academic level, the words outstanding, talented, exceptional come up. And actually, I think it was one of the speakers a couple of years back found that one of the US universities had trouble encouraging female candidates. And they went to them and they said, it's because these words came up in the adverts. They didn't see themselves as outstanding, exceptional. So I wonder whether you had a comment on that amongst university bodies generally, that it should change the language in advertising.
Absolutely. It's a very easy answer for me. I think we should not use those sorts of adjectives. I think that they unnecessarily lead to a less diverse applicant pool. Not in any way necessarily a better applicant pool, but what you're really selecting for is people who perceive themselves as likely to be perceived in that way, right? It's this very complicated, what do I think of what you think of me? Mm-hmm. You don't need to invoke that. There's absolutely no need for those sorts of adjectives to be used in these advertisements. Princeton strongly encourages faculty not to use those sorts of adjectives. That's been a change in some departments, but that is something that we have done. More generally, since we're talking about job advertisements, writing an ad as broadly as possible is a good way to get a diverse pool. The more unnecessary criteria that we put into an ad, whether it be something like this person has to be outstanding and exceptional, or whether it's even specifying the area more narrowly. One thing that has been found to improve the diversity of an applicant pool is when the advertisement is written as broadly, as unconstrained as possible, while of course still meeting the needs of the institution.
So, thank you very much, all of you, for your questions, and Sarah Jane for her answers. Before we thank Sarah Jane properly and finally for her speech this morning, I just want to deal with one matter of housekeeping. The number of questions we had, and some that we didn't get to, shows to us what we knew from last year, which was that people like to spend time in the next session, in the panel sessions, with the panel members and asking questions and getting answers. So in order to do that, what we've done this year is broken you into two groups. So you should have either a number 1 or 2 on your name badge. If you haven't, please speak to members of staff, but I hope you all have. I'm reliably told you all have. And what that means is that the first group will stay in here after the coffee break, and the other group will go to the Cone Centre where the staff will direct you. The panels will speak twice in the same room, so if you're in the same room after lunch, you've made a mistake. You should be going to a different room, all right? And the panel chairs will change, but the idea is to give you more time with the panels. So, Sarah Jane, it's been fascinating, really fascinating having you here and speaking so passionately about your research and what you believe in. You could see, I think, from the whole audience that we were riveted by your talk. So can I just thank Sarah Jane on your behalf once more. Thank you.